Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome again to the latest edition of Deep Crawl's webinar. And today we are doing Rethinking Linking, Revolutionizing Internal Link Building. My name's John Myers, and it's great to be hosting the first webinar of the year in 2019. We've got a fantastic speaker for you today, Mr. Kevin Indig of German Accelerator. Kevin, welcome, and thank you for being here, and very, very much looking forward to your presentation, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. Super stoked.
No, thank you, sir. And I think, just to shout out a little bit about Kevin, I mean, Kevin's worked with many guises across the years, internal SEO works, and as I say, working now with some companies thinking about that acceleration, and with the most fantastic job title I think I've ever heard of, and Mentor of Growth. So it really says on the tin what Kevin gets up to, and he's been working with some great brands recently, and he's on a bit of a road trip at the moment all over the place in some respects, all over the world, from San Francisco to Sydney. So it's fantastic that he has the time to come on here and talk to us today on the Deep Crawl webinar. Obviously, we're going to go in the usual format for you guys that have been with us in the past. We'll do 30 to 40 minutes of presentation. And then we'll get into the Q&A. We absolutely love the Q&A part, and it's really credit to the speaker to give them the questions. So please, please, please get those questions ready. And don't wait till the end. Submit them via the chat box that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. Please get them in, as if Kevin comes up with a great point or you want to ask him something, I can then start collating those questions ready for the end of the process. Obviously, this is a great subject, and it is a personal favorite of mine. It really is important to get this right. Everybody talks about external links in the world of SEO, but internal linking is just as important in my eyes, and more so in the way that SEO is actually done these days. So this is going to be really interesting. So I've seen the deck, some really good points in there. It's really, really important to get this right, to get your site set up to benefit from Google crawling it and gain those rankings in the, as I say, in the current marketplace that Google is. We're going to go through the usual process as well. As I say, the website webinar will be recorded for everybody. So it's great that you guys are here live today listening to us. But we will publish a full recap by tomorrow lunchtime with a supporting blog post and the actual recording of the webinar on the Deep Crawl blog, and obviously send it out to you guys that have attended today on email as well. Please, 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 at the end when you sign out in an hour's time, we have a little survey that pops up. It takes about 10 seconds to fill it in. We love your feedback. Tell us whether we're doing a good job, or there's things that could be better. Tell us about the sound quality. Recommend some speakers to us. We've had that in the past, and we've got them on, and up to now we've listened to everything that you said we'd like to think. And also, if you look in the chat box at the moment, we have our latest white paper, which ties in well with today's webinar, which is site architecture. You can download it on that link available in the chat box to you now. Grab it. It's a fantastic read. There's some great content, and then there's some great comments from some fantastic SEO practitioners as well. So along with the white paper and along with what you're going to learn from Kevin today, I think we have a fantastic hour ahead of us. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mr. Kevin Indig of German Accelerator to take us through, obviously, revolutionizing internal link building. So over to you, Kevin, and I'm looking forward to this presentation too. The floor is yours for about the next 30 to 35 minutes.
Great, thank you so much, John. Let me just share my screen real quick, and we should be good here. Okay, give me just a second to turn off the GoToMeeting. Here we go. Okay, so yeah, thanks again, John, and thanks to Deep Crawl for hosting me and for the professional preparations, and of course thanks to the audience for everybody to tune in and give me your time. I want to do my best to to make it worthwhile. So as you know, the topic here is internal link building. I've recently published a fair amount of content about that. I spoke at Tech SEO Boost about the TIPR model, and we'll also talk about what that is and how it works in this presentation. However, there are also some new components that I haven't used in any blog articles before or spoken about. So just for you as an FYI, this is not a recycled presentation. This is something completely new that I'm doing. And I want to speak about 3 different parts. As I mentioned, we'll speak about the TIPR model, we'll speak about log files, and we'll also speak about centralized versus decentralized linking. Before we do that, though, I kind of want to set the stage a little bit by talking about why I talk about internal link building, right? There's obviously a lot to SEO. We know the content is really important, user experience, off-page and link building and all these kind of things. So why is it that I want to talk about this specific topic? And the reason and answer for that is that SEO is getting harder. I think deep down, most practitioners have really felt the same feeling that I've been feeling, which is that everything is getting a bit more fuzzy. Things are getting harder. We're not dealing with just maybe 10, 20, 30 ranking factors. We're dealing with lots of different ones, and it all comes down to three big reasons. And so the number one, or the first reason that I want to point out here is that SEO is just simply more complex. Right, Google seems to apply lots of different ranking factors. Some people say hundreds, maybe even thousands, and they seem to be applied and rolled out more fluently. What I mean by that is that I've noticed that certain ranking factors apply to certain industries differently. And I think Searchmetrics has laid out some decent research in that, where they show how certain ranking factors are applied differently. So in the finance industry, for example, HTTPS seems to be much more important than images, for example, which might be more important for travel sites. So this is how you can think of it, but it makes it, it makes SEO harder and more complex because it's more difficult to compare sites to each other, and it's more difficult to figure out what really works for your site and your industry. The second reason why I think SEO is getting more complex is that the competition is increasing. So the return on ad spend seems to go up across the board on Google, on Facebook, meaning that advertisement and paid search is getting more expensive, and that means less companies can afford to participate and compete. And in return, it means that more companies will try to find an angle in SEO. And of course, that ultimately leads to more competition in the search results and in rankings, and content. That is another reason for why SEO is getting harder. And then number three is that we are competing more with Google itself. These are screenshots from the same search results pages for the query buy sneakers. And the left side is obviously desktop, right side is mobile. And with the red little line, I indicated the fold. So everything above the red line is what you see when you enter the page, and everything below is obviously what you see when you scroll. And I simply wanted to show that Google is using lots of SERP integrations here, like shopping ads at the top, or maps, news integration, images. And it's not necessarily to say that this doesn't send traffic to other sites, but what we clearly see is that Google tries to answer lots of queries and lots of search intents in the search results. There's obviously some bit of speculation about why that is the case. It certainly has something to do with its ad business and just being able to show people more ads. But what we can say for sure is that in the last couple of years, Google has tremendously changed its positioning from being a search engine to an answer engine. Right, so Google keeps more traffic for itself, it sends less to other sites, and that obviously decreases click rates and leads to less traffic coming to your site. So all that together means that we have to kind of shift our thinking and our priorities a little bit. And this little pyramid that you see on the slide is kind of a super high level personal distinguishment between the four bigger disciplines that we can control and their impact. So again, backlinks is not on here because this is something that we can impact to a degree, but we cannot control 100%. However, the content on our site is perfectly controllable. Internal linking, user experience, on page, all of these things, we can really influence to whatever degree we want. And I personally, and again, keep in mind that this is my personal kind of estimation here, but I personally think that internal linking is the second most important factor of these big four, and the biggest levers to pull after content, right? So we have content at the bottom, which is the basis, and then I think internal linking is the kind of second biggest lever. Then comes user experience, and then other on-page factors like optimizing headings, alt text, and a couple of other things. So with all that being said, this is the reason for why I want to talk about internal link optimization and not something else. And I think there's lots of value to be gained from focusing on that. Also because building backlinks or external links is getting so much harder, right? I'm sure user practitioner or a marketer, you've been reached out to many times, people asking you whether they could place like some content or get a backlink from your site, and you know how stressful that is. So internal link optimization. I draw lots of experience from my work at Atlassian. I've been there for about 3 years, just recently left the company. But I've also worked with other bigger companies in the space, from eBay to Pinterest, and then lots of other bigger consumer and B2B companies and startups. And currently, I'm a mentor for growth at the German Accelerator, a startups accelerator in the Silicon Valley, and I share my knowledge and what I learn on my blog, kevin-indig.com. So with all that being said, I will show lots of different examples in this presentation from a side of Atlassian that we optimized with all the principles that I will convey here, and we increased organic traffic by about 160% in about 2 years, mainly or almost exclusively using the tactics that I want to present here in the blog article. So that's kind of my example here. But I've also been reached out to by lots of other people in the space who are testing out the TIPR model and experimenting with, again, the systems and concepts that I wrote about and presented. So if you yourself want to apply some of these, I'd be personally interested to just hear, what your experience is and what results you saw. I think, the more we share our knowledge, the better, and especially our experiences. So that being said, the first topic that I want to talk about today is centralized versus decentralized internal linking, and I think it's crucial because a lot of the concepts that I'm presenting and that I'm explaining here are kind of divided or kind of dependent on which of the two are important for your side or your client side. And the principle is very, very simple. So centralized internal linking is something that you see on the left side, where we would have a home page, this big white circle on top of the graph. And then we have, for example, a blog and a couple of other pages. And of course, the product landing page, the red circle in the middle. And so the idea here is that internal linking is centralized insofar as that it wants to bring PageRank mostly to the product landing page, and of course also to some of the other content formats. But the ultimate destination and goal is the landing page, where people sign up, whether for a trial or for fill out a contact form, and they want to get in touch with the product, right? So this is where the PageRank that flows across the site or through the site is not evened out, but it is focused and concentrated towards the landing page and the pages that are closely connected to it, right? So I also penciled in a microsite at the top right corner. It could be what I'm trying to say is it could be another content format other than the blog itself. But in most cases, what happens is, you have the product landing pages that ranks for your product name, and then maybe a couple of other generic keywords. And you have blog articles that you obviously want to rank for long tail and sometimes shorthead keywords. And they should kind of, guide people through this funnel, that starts with, the awareness, and then people consider a couple of options and then come to a consideration or conclusion. Which it should then make on the landing page, right? So there are a lot of pages that all this is one product landing page where people kind of end up and then convert. Now, on the other end of that is the decentralized internal linking model, where you have a home page, but then you have lots of category pages, and then you have a couple of public instances. And you could replace the word instances here with product pages. So when you think of an e-commerce company or web shop, then obviously category pages speak for themselves, but then the instances would be the product pages where people ultimately buy the product. However, it is fundamentally different because you have lots of different conversion points on your site. Whereas with the centralized model, there's a single point of conversion. Sometimes when you have several products, of course, there are several product landing pages, but I think you all understand what I'm trying to get to and the gist here. Now, understanding that basic concept and what seems so intuitive and simple is absolutely crucial when it comes to internal linking, because it means that the strategy has to look fundamentally different. So before we jump deeper into how to tweak your internal linking accordingly, an example of a centralized internal linking strategy would be, of course, Atlassian. I picked an example here that I feel comfortable with. We have lots of different products like Jira, Confluence, Stride, Bitbucket, and whatnot, but they all have pretty much a single landing page on which people can convert. Now, little asterisks, there are of course soft conversions like newsletter signups that then ultimately pay to the bigger, to the hard conversion or to the main conversion. But ultimately everything is oriented towards the landing page. And on the decentralized side, we see something like Pinterest or Amazon or maybe even Facebook that has categories of different boards. But ultimately people can sign up on any type of page, or pin, better said. And again, that's very crucial for the internal linking. Now, we often see the centralized model at software as a service companies, at apps, or at enterprises, or better said, enterprise-focused companies. The decentralized model is more often applied to e-commerce companies, social networks, and marketplaces. And a marketplace is something like Airbnb, for example, that has a certain inventory, but is also not really an e-commerce company in that sense. So with all that being said, to summarize again, the centralized model has a focus of, or basically in the centralized model, PageRank and KaiRank is focused towards the landing page. And I'll explain KaiRank in just a second. And at the same time, the user flow follows PageRank. This is also, something to keep in mind. Ultimately, you want every user to pretty much convert on the landing page, and the PageRank is oriented towards the same direction. And on the decentralized side, PageRank and KaiRank are pretty much in balance, and the user flow and PageRank flow are detached from each other. Now, what is this thing KaiRank that I've been mentioning here? KaiRank is in a nutshell and the opposite of PageRank. So if PageRank is the basically link equity or link power that a page or URL receives, KaiRank is the link power that a URL or a page gives away. And the two are really important to keep in mind, because the balance of PageRank and KaiRank says a lot about how strong a certain page or page type is. And one example that I wanted to bring up from the site as a lesson that I've been using here across the presentation example is this one, where we figured out that a category page, which you see on the left side, has almost 3,000 incoming links, but only gives away not even 50. And on the other hand, there's another page type that is on the same site that gets 12 incoming links on average and gives away almost 1,100. So very obviously, both of them are in balance, where the left page type or left page gets a lot of PageRank and quote unquote keeps it, whereas the right page template gets just a very little PageRank or link power and tries to give away a lot. Now, again, this is obviously a huge imbalance, even though Atlassian is an example for the centralized link model, right? So there's still, if it was decentralized, I would try to completely equal out incoming and outgoing links, or outgoing links, better said. But in this case, I still want to kind of untie that imbalance a little bit. And that leads me to the second bigger topic that I want to speak about here, which is combining internal and external PageRank. And this is basically the TIPR model. So TIPR, or maybe start here, leading up to it. So what we know from the classic PageRank patent and from all sorts of graph is this kind of constellation, where we have a website that has a couple of pages that link to each other in different forms, right? So, for example, page A has 3 outgoing links to page B, C, and D, whereas page D only has 1 outgoing link. And then page B has 2 incoming links, whereas page D, once again, only has 1 incoming link. So could be representative of a high-level, website. Now, we can use that concept to relatively specifically calculate internal PageRank And a lot of people and tools operate based on that metric. But the idea of TIPR is that this model or this calculation is incomplete. It is not stupid or not or not useless, but it is somewhat incomplete because it's missing backlinks or links from other sites. So imagine we have a site B, and we would calculate the internal page rank for every page for site A and site B. Then we have to take into account how much page rank is being passed from other sites. And that, of course, changes the calculation for the internal page rank, because all of a sudden, the page rank for page D in this case is not what it was without taking backlinks into consideration. Right, so I think you get what I'm trying to say here. To get a full picture of internal linking and page rank distribution, we need to take backlinks or external links into account and then recalculate the internal linking. This is what I basically tried to get to with the TIPR model. TIPR stands for True Internal Page Rank, and it combines page rank on the top, chi-rank at the left, backlinks at the right, and then log files at the bottom. And we'll talk about log files in depth, at the third step of this presentation. So what you want to do here is combine all of this information to get the best possible picture of how PageRank flows through your site and where you have imbalances, roadblock, and issues, which you can then fix and unleash more PageRank throughout your site. So the high level model or process of applying TIPR starts with a crawl of the site. You then calculate the internal page rank and chi-rank, and obviously deep crawl is a huge help with that because it does that for you with a reliable model. Then you would add backlinks to get the true internal page rank, meaning how internal page rank is actually distributed. Then you would, in the fourth step, add the crawl rate from log files. So log files obviously are the access logs or your server log files that show you how often Google comes to your site and looks at a different page and how it moves through your site. And the crawl rate is basically how often Google comes to visit a URL within a certain amount of time. Most of the time I'm using the weekly crawl rate in this instance, but you can use the monthly crawl rate or even the daily crawl rate. As long as you stay consistent, it doesn't change the outcome of the model. And again, we'll talk about in depth about crawl rate and log files in just a second. But then with the fifth step, you want to sort and rank the metrics that you just accrued through crawls and adding the backlinks. And then in the sixth steps, you want to then use that ranked list of URLs to give recommendations and either balance out PageRank or focus it more towards the landing page. When we speak about the backlinks here, you probably wondered where you would get those from. And again, as long as you stay consistent, the source isn't really the biggest factor here. So use your backlink tool of choice. So this is a model, like an arbitrary model that is supposed to explain and highlight how this is being applied and used. So we have 4 URLs. We determined the weekly crawl frequency for URL. It's 200 weekly crawls, 150 for the seconds, etc. We have the domain pop, which is the domain popularity, and basically stands for the amount of links from unique domains, right? So what you'll often find is that when you look at the absolute number of backlinks, that sometimes you have these duplicate links which do not seem as as effective. I would recommend something like a domain popularity to understand how many links from unique domains you're getting to a page. Then in the third or fourth row, better said, we have PageRank, and then the last row we have chi-rank. Now that is all nice and dandy, but the problem is that when you have lots of different types of metrics, it becomes really hard to sort, right? So we have hundreds for the core frequency domain pop, and we have decimals for PageRank and chi-rank. And so what I want to recommend to do here is to rank the URLs for the specific metric. So what you see here is that, for example, URL number 1 has the second highest crawl frequency, whereas URL number 2 has the third highest, right? So you rank them according to this specific metric. URL number 1 has the highest domain pop, URL number 2 has the second highest domain pop, and so forth. And URL number 1 also has the highest page rank and chi-rank. You then take the average of these metrics, which you see at the very right, and then you sort that list, and that helps you to get a better understanding of your URL strength, factored in the chi-rank, the backlinks, and the crawl frequency. And this is how you get a full list that you can then look at and look for patterns, right? So basically when we applied this model to the site that I mentioned earlier, we saw first of all that a lot of URLs are do not have a lot of incoming links, right? So what you see here on the y-axis is the number of the inlinks and outlinks, and then on the x-axis you have the sheer amount of URLs. So inlinks in yellow, outlinks in green, and what you see here is that many URLs have lots of or a high amount of outgoing links, whereas a few URLs have a lot of incoming links. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there is an imbalance going on. And if this was for a decentralized internal link model, I would try to get everything even, basically. But here in this case, we're dealing with a centralized model, but I still want to kind of balance it out a little bit to make sure that we're making use of PageRank a bit better. It's a bit highly skewed here. And so when we use the same data that I showed in the previous graph and look for the different page types, then we see, for example, that the categories have a lot of or get a lot of page rank but don't give away a lot, and we saw this earlier. And then add-ons, which you see in the middle here, give away a lot of page rank, but don't get a lot. So once again, this kind of proves this imbalance that we're getting. We would love to distribute more page rank to the apps, which you see on the second place from the left here. They have a somewhat balanced or pretty balanced distribution of chi-rank and page rank, but would still love to give them more page rank because the categories have enough by far. So this is what I'm trying to say when I'm talking about balancing it out. And then lastly, I want to talk about using log files to monitor not only how PageRank flows through your site, but also how the changes affect that kind of PageRank distribution. And the reason I think that is not only underrated but also very highly effective is that correlates highly with PageRank. I'm sure that if you follow Google and patents and Google spokespeople, then you have often heard that there's a higher correlation between the crawl rate and PageRank. It's not the only factor that's being used to determine the crawl rate, but it seems, after my experience, and I think lots of other SEOs, to be the strongest one. So that's why I very much recommend to look at log files and constantly monitor how they change, maybe on a monthly basis or even weekly, but at least on a quarterly basis, because they are, after my mind, the best monitoring tool to determine whether internal link changes have been successful or not. And so when we look at the log files of the site that I've mentioned a couple of times throughout this presentation, then this is at the very left, you see where we started to make the changes. Graph is pretty much the same as the traffic graph that I introduced in the beginning. And then we see how it impacted crawl rate positively. It then changed a bit throughout the course of that time span, since we did some experimentation with internal linking and changed a couple of things. But altogether, it very much moves up and to the right, which is exactly what we're trying to see here. But of course, if you were to apply that for your site, you would be interested in how specific page templates and maybe even very specific pages change in crawl frequency. This is an excerpt or a screenshot of how we monitored crawl frequency for different keywords and obviously different pages over time. So very insightful to look at that on a keyword or URL basis and see what the patterns are. Right, so is there a certain page type that increases or decreases in crawl frequency, and is that because you've recently changed your internal linking structure, or is it maybe because you've recently added more backlinks to certain URLs? So this is certainly a dashboard that is worth keeping, and updating as often as possible. Some people, as far as I know, are working on automating such dashboards and trying to come up with some sort of a tool or a solution. So super curious and excited to see more of that. And then lastly, a couple of learnings that I wanted to share, quick learnings that we learned along the way when using that. So first of all, the robots.txt was the most crawled URL by far, and we're talking about 10 times more than any other URL. So Google seems to be really hungry, or well, obviously, they follow robots.txt, but you can prove and see how often they actually make use of that file. Number two is XML sitemaps. In terms of the time spent on a single URL, XML sitemaps were by far the most one. So of all of our pages on this specific site, Google spent most time crawling through XML sitemaps, and that of course makes sense, but it is good to have that proven by data. And then lastly, 404 errors. We saw that when 404 errors spiked due to a technical error on the site, that the overall crawl frequency of the site decreased tremendously. So I very much, my experience very much tells me that 404 errors do have a huge impact on your site performance. If you have a site with lots of 404 errors that haven't been fixed over time, then maybe look at your log files and see how they might have impacted your overall crawl frequency or crawl rate. It is pretty much shocking to see how that works. So my recommendation at this point is to get rid of 404s as good as possible. And if you really have pages that should not, that are not available anymore, or that shouldn't be indexed, then give them a 410 status code, right? To me, this is the same kind of conundrum as with 302 or 301 redirects, where 302 redirects hardly pass any link juice and lead to all sorts of problems with crawl frequency. And the same to me applies to 404s and 410s, where I think that 410 are kind of the long-term solution to showing that a page is not available anymore, because literally taken 404 means that a page is temporarily not available, right? So Google keeps coming back to crawl it, and if it sees that the status code doesn't change, it then decreases the crawl frequency. And it looks like if that amount of 404 errors hits the certain threshold, that then crawl frequency is decreased across the whole site. So these are just a couple of learnings. To summarize that all together, make sure you crawl your site regularly, use something like deep crawl, calculate PageRank and chirank, add backlinks into your models to get the true internal PageRank or TIPR, optimize your site accordingly, and then use log files to monitor how the changes impact crawl frequency. So if you want to read a bit more about that topic, I wrote an article about that on my site, kevin-indig.com, about internal link optimization with TIPR. I'd be very curious to hear your questions in just a second, but also feel free to hit me up on Twitter, show me your experimentations, ask me questions, or just reach out to say hello. And then if you're interested, I'm writing a weekly newsletter called TechBound, where I'm writing about things like TIPR, but also broader things in the growth space. And then lastly, again, my website. But first of all, thank you so much for your attention and to DeepCrawl for hosting me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kevin. Great content, great slides, bang on time. So loads of time for Q&A, and you'll be pleased to hear that we have questions, and quite a few of them, sir. So mission accomplished in the presentational stage, and I've got quite a few questions to throw at you, so from many different people, which is great. And appreciate you guys all listening in. It's great to see the numbers nice and high from an attendees point of view and the live time. So I hope you guys have found that really useful as to what Kevin has said. It's certainly got me thinking about a few things. And just to back you up as well on that last point you made about 404s, I couldn't agree more. In the sense of make sure you look at that and find that. I mean, I was looking at a site last week that had virtually, I think it was 2,500 pages with 404 pages, which was about 25% of the site, because there was just poor legacy of just poor cleanup work being done. And that'll have a massive effect in the knock-on of the rankings, as you mentioned. So without further ado, let's get into the questions, Kevin. And I always like to start with the first question that we get. So thank you, Mr. Jason Kang, for the first question of the day. That was about 15 minutes into the presentation. Jason's basically asking Kevin, he said, I have my head around decentralized internal link structure, but can you go a little deeper into the business case for centralized internal linking? He's basically asking that because most companies have multiple category levels.
Yes. So ultimately, it is relatively simple to decide which model applies to your site, right? As I mentioned in the webinar, decentralized internal link, or decentralized sites, better said, they have multiple conversion touch points throughout the site. So that could be an inventory, right, where you can buy different products, or it could be, some sort of social network where if you're not signed up, you can sign up on profile pages or business pages or search pages or all sorts of different formats, right? Whereas for the centralized model, everything kind of leads, like the whole funnel, the whole user flow kind of leads to that single point of conversion where people would sign up. And when you apply internal linking to that, or basically when you think about which of these pages have the highest priority, then it's usually the conversion pages. And so I hope that I hope that the points came across, that you basically have to apply these two different models of optimizing your internal linking, which is either focus or balance. And the balance means that most of the pages should have an equal amount of PageRank and KaiRank, meaning of receiving link power and the link power that they're giving away. Whereas for the centralized model, you want a bit more of a focus. You want you want your most important pages for the business to ultimately get most of the page rank, or get at least enough page rank to rank for the keywords that they're supposed to rank for.
Great. No, that's very handy. And just leads in, just to clarify a question as well. I mean, it seems to be very similar to what you've just been talking about. Josh Turner said, "Are you promoting the centralized method or the decentralized method? You personally, in a way, or is it right in thinking that they do work well in their own right for different websites?"
Yeah, I love that question. Definitely something I should have made a bit clearer, because I very much agree that there's no better or worse. Both models are just different, and we have to change our thinking of internal linking accordingly. But they ultimately depend on the business model, right? So you're kind of bound to one of the two, depending on how your business operates, works.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. Just I thought I'd just clarify that one up there. Switching gears a little bit, talking about different types of tools, and obviously you mentioned Deep Crawl, so thank you for that. That's nice to see it's in your armory. But Hola is basically asking, with a site that say has hundreds of thousands or millions of pages, what tools do you use to keep track and implement the pages from an internal linking point of view?
Yeah. So of course I use Deep Crawl, right? And very much like the tools, very helpful and very easy to share reports and so
Absolutely.
on.
Feel free to mention other ones though, Kevin. We're not precious about that.
No, sure. No, just wanted to make clear, it's not just like something that I say for the webinar. I actually do use Deep Crawl. But I think it very much depends on your on what you're trying to achieve. I think for in lots of instances, Screaming Frog has shown to be really effective, even for larger sites now. Bodify is one, right, to mention a German competitor, that's RYTE. I'm sure there are a couple of other tools that I've used in the past, and I'm forgetting. SiteBulb comes to mind as well. Ultimately, most of these tools, are able to return a PageRank and KaiRank score. It much more depends on other factors outside the sheer rank. Obviously, what you feel most comfortable with, what your personal preference is in that instance. But I found in my experience and talking to other people who applied the TIPR model that the tool itself has never been the limiting factor.
Okay, that's good to know. And just thinking about the TIPR model itself, Craig Harkins is just asking the question around have you worked out any differences in the links in the main body content versus footer and navigation links? Are you seeing differences in the way that it performs, or anything within that idea?
Yeah. So when we speak about optimizing internal linking, then most of the time we're speaking about optimizing at scale, which means we're talking about the top navigation and footer and secondary navigation modules or elements throughout the sites. So of course, in the in body or in content links do move the scale as well, but since they're mostly being set and applied manually, it is not easy to, or it is much less efficient to optimize them. It's not impossible, but you have to do it by hand most of the time, or maybe write a script, which becomes a bit more complex. So we're talking mostly about these three different areas: footer, top navigation, and maybe secondary navigatory elements.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, sir. Just thinking about that as well, Aman Braz just asked an interesting question. He said, I'm interested in knowing your thoughts, which kind of expands on what you've just said in some respects, on menus for decentralized sites. He says he runs an e-commerce site with over 200 plus categories, all of which are accessible on each page via a drop-down mega menu. Does this increase the amount of links we're giving away for each page? Just your view on it. I think
yes,
touches on what you've just talked about in some respects. I think I know what I would say, but over to you on this one.
No, totally. It very much seems like, if you have a mega menu with all the categories, that definitely increases the amount of outgoing pages, outgoing links. However, that does not necessarily mean it's good or bad. And completely ignoring, what that does for user experience, I can't tell since I don't know the site. But from a sheer internal linking perspective, it doesn't even mean that's objectively good or bad, because it very much depends on how much page rank you get. So when you look at Amazon, like they have quite a lot of links, for example, in their menu, and as well, but they also get so much page rank that they can allow themselves to have a high amount of incoming and outgoing links. And I think that's really the crucial thing to take away here, is that it's hard to just look at a site and say that's good or bad. Sometimes it's possible in extreme cases, but most of the time you need the data behind it. You need to know how much page rank did you get, especially from other sites, and then look at your crawl rate and make an informed decision about, does Google actually crawl certain page types? Is there an issue, or might, maybe are some pages or page types underfed in terms of incoming page rank? I hope that is clear.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. Always like when I get a little mention as well. Just Danis Agkar's just saying very good content. Thanks a lot. So it's always nice to hear that. Thank you for that comment, Danis. A few people have asked, and I think it's easy for us to sit here and talk through this, and obviously talk about rank and stuff like that. A few people have actually asked the question. One, can you explain rank again? So just, in very basic terms. Obviously, you talked about inbound links and outbound links. Can you just explain, obviously, where rank fits into that equation exactly?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's basically an inverse page rank, right? So when you think of page rank as the link power a page receives, then rank is, or rank is the link power a page gives away, right? And you have to look at both, because otherwise you only look at one end of the equation. You have to look at how the balance looks like of a page or page type. And once again, it doesn't always mean that every page should be balanced. It depends on whether your site is structured after the centralized or decentralized model. But yeah, you can very simply understand rank or rank as the outgoing link power, as the link power that a page gives away to other pages.
And that's the internal page. So that's one internal page linking to another internal page, and the power that page passes internally. So we've moved from external links in the website to internal links, and that's when we move from PageRank to rank.
Correct. Yes.
There we go. Hopefully that's cleared it up for everybody. Just thinking about then, leading on from that, Cliff Haley's just asking, in terms of internal linking to improve indexation, from an e-commerce site that rolls out many new digital products on a daily basis. Obviously, we're working in the e-commerce world, new stuff goes up all the time. How would you go about ensuring those new products are found, crawled, and indexed as quickly as possible?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I love that.
Great question. Good question, Cliff.
Yeah, so it definitely comes from a practitioner. You hear that right away. So yeah, thank you for that. The answer is there are a couple of ways. So first of all, I think you want to get some data to verify that crawling could be an issue. So what you want to do is you want to get a list of all the URLs that are not indexed, or maybe not indexed quickly, and then you want to check your log files to understand how often Google crawls them. or basically how quickly after they were live Google crawls them might be better. And then you have a couple of options, right? If you can verify that crawling is the issue here, that there's a pattern or a correlation between hardly crawled URLs and indexation, then you can understand that these might need more PageRank, or they might need a different position in terms of the internal link architecture. And what I mean by that is maybe newer products need to be linked from the homepage or category pages that are very visible, so that Google can find them quickly, right? And again, we're not talking about XML sitemaps and such things yet. But from a sheer internal linking perspective, you want to find the information that helps you validate or verify that internal linking is kind of a problem. And then the next step, think about how can you better tease products on pages that are being crawled off and that get a lot of PageRank. In most cases, these are category pages and of course the home page. So maybe, again, in some cases, you want to maybe tease or show 40 products on the homepage instead of 20, same with the category page. And then there are a couple of other tactics like using an HTML sitemap to potentially shorten the amount of clicks it takes from the home page, which is most often the most crawled page of all, to the newer products or to product pages in general, right? So again, there's only limited information that I have, but I think it's a fantastic question. And I think internal linking, PageRank, KaiRank, and log files are exactly the way to figure out how you can solve that problem from a structural perspective.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's virtually a blog post in that question, but in some respects, there's so much you could talk about on that. I think the tip on the sitemaps, that's a great tip, actually. So, I'd shout that one out for sure. Just from Michael Duncan, just really enjoyed the presentation, excited to apply this knowledge, looking forward to attending more. Thanks. So it's, again, guys, thank you for the feedback. Just shipping around back into thinking about tools and stuff like that. Just people always are asking us about, what sorts of tools do you use? And, there's quite a few in here. So which tool do you prefer? Max Coin is asking, which tool do you prefer to use to check URL crawl rates?
Yeah, so that is coming from your server logs. And I personally like Splunk a lot. To accrue, store, and dig through server logs. However, it's a bit complicated because it uses a query language that you have to learn first. Ultimately, it really depends on whether you use an Nginx or an Apache server, and how you're able to access log files. If you have a WordPress type of setup and a hosted solution, maybe a smaller site, then your hoster should provide you access to log files. And in other cases, you should, talk to your backend developer of choice. But if you talk about more my personal preference, then I've made some good experience with Splunk.
No, good product. And then just following up on that with a couple more ones around Kristen Crawford, just saying, which software do you use to get the data for the number of incoming and outgoing links and number of pages?
Yeah, so again, that comes from your crawl tool of choice. I think we mentioned Deep Crawl, we mentioned Screaming Frog, Write, Spotify, and Sitebulb. There are surely a couple of others out there. And again, it really doesn't matter until you have 1 million+ pages. Then you might want to use a certain solution. But all of these tools will give you the internal and external link, or in the incoming and outgoing links, better said. They will give you a crawl of the site, and I think all of them also give you PageRank and KaiRank. So you should pair well with all these.
Yeah, and Matthew Evans, just to give Matthew a shout, asked a very similar tool. On which tool would you recommend to calculate PageRank and KaiRank on a large e-commerce site? And I think you're right. You've named a lot of tools there that probably offer all of the same sorts of things. It's just probably when you get to a larger e-commerce site, look to the more enterprise level solutions, because they'll deal with the number of pages better, Matthew. So Kevin's kind of mentioned them all in that sense. So as I say, we always get lots of tool questions and lots of big questions. There's an incredible amount of questions. So thank you very much for all of these questions, guys. So just completely left field one. I always like this question because I get it all the time. It's from Panos. How do you convince website owners to give them your log files? And I'd love to hear your version of that one, Kevin.
Oh yeah, it sounds like a classic SEO problem. Like how do I
Can't
get
use
resources?
violence,
How to get
okay?
how to get things done. So the easy, cheap way is to just bribe developers with beer and pizza. But the serious way is, man, it really depends on what the problem is and why they don't want to do that. Now, I do know there's a very specific issue when it comes to GDPR, because in certain cases, log files also contain personally identifiable information. So I do assume that you asked that question behind that background. And in this case, ask for filtered log files, right? You don't really care about any user data. You just want everything filtered after the Google bot user agent. And when we're talking about that, there are different user agents that they use, for example, for to crawl pages or HTML, that they use for images and video and mobile and whatnot. So make sure you have the right user agent in place. Also, from the right IP standpoint of view, there are certain tools that crawl with the user agent Google, but are actually not Google. So make sure you get that right, and then filter everything, right? Take out the personal identifiable information, and just get the stuff that you really want, right? So only URLs that have been hit by Googlebot. And then in most cases, I don't see a reason why a business or a developer would not want to give those away, granted you're consulting or working for the business. Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's just a large chunk of data that doesn't really help anybody to do any harm. In worst cases, ask to sign an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. But again, I think once that's stripped off, it should be relatively harmless.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think you're right in the sense of try and strip the log file down and just ask for the Googlebot data, because there's a huge amount of just rubbish that just sits outside of that, because obviously the log file picks it all up. And from my experience, sometimes just going and asking, actually, I was the guy that's in charge of, that sort of side of things within the business, more than likely we'll have more chance of getting it off them if you just ask for that part rather than asking for the whole crown jewels, because they tend to be quite precious about that stuff down in the technical department. Okay, so thinking about just different types of sites again, we've talked about e-commerce, and Sajit Kumar's just asking, from a mode point of view of centralized or decentralized, do you have a preference which would work better for news sites if you've ever worked on news sites in this way?
Again, there's no real preference. It is really driven by your site and your business model, right? So it's not really something that you can pick and choose. It is much more something that that is driven by how you sell products and what type of business you are. Again, for e-commerce sites, social networks, and then marketplaces, the decentralized model makes way more sense. And on the other side, SaaS companies, enterprise companies, and something like apps make more sense to follow the centralized model. And when a site is new, it most of the time means that it hasn't received lots of links, meaning that it doesn't have a lot of external page rank coming in. So you want to take a bit of your time. We want to be a bit patient with these things. However, it makes sense to already start looking at your internal linking architecture or structure, even when the site is relatively small, because obviously the better of a job you do at this stage, the better it will scale up. So I think when you have, let's say, less than 500 pages, I think using internal linking is maybe not the strongest lever to pull. But as soon as you hit, upwards of 500, you can start thinking about it. And again, when we talk about e-commerce, then we talk with categories and we talk with several products, unless, of course, you're a single product direct-to-consumer startup, which I assume in this case you might not be. This is the only exception that I see here. But when we talk about broad e-commerce, and most of the time the decentralized version or model is really what applies to you, and you have to think about how to balance out incoming and outgoing page rank. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think good answer. So Holly Miller asked, first of all, she said, great presentation. So again, great feedback. Thank you, Holly. Her question is just around, we talked on navigation earlier on as well, kind of thing. But then she's asking the question of how often would you recommend changing top level navigation on e-com sites, or would you recommend changing it at all? When we talk about the model.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thanks, Holly, and nice to see you on the webinar, by the way. So that's a really good question, actually. So how often should you change internal links, especially in the navigation. And I think that to be able to really grasp its impact, and this is really, this is my personal experience, but I think you would want to take at least a week or two, rather ending on the long tail, so rather erring on the 2-week side of things, to wait, until Google has processed everything accordingly and the changes become really visible. When we made changes at Atlassian to larger sites, we're talking about 1 million+ pages, then we often waited 4 weeks and longer to really, give some time to Google to process everything and recalculate page rank and whatnot, and then for the changes to become visible. Now, you will see the changes in your log files becoming visible relatively quickly, but just to sort out stuff like seasonality and other noise and other volatility factors, wait at least, I would say, 2 weeks before making more changes. So roll them out in batches, and make sure that you're able to kind of trace back changes in trends to what you did earlier, right? So if you change something every day, I think it's just really hard to see through what actually moved the needle or not.
No, I totally agree. Would you change that in any way? This is partly just a question for me to add to that. Would you change that in any way based against the type of site and the frequency that Google comes back and crawls it? Because obviously we see like news sites where Google's literally waiting for content and crawls the site on a minute by minute basis in some respects, or maybe financial sector where Google comes back on a more prolonged period to crawl those pages. Would you change it up based against what you'd see there, or?
Yeah, it's also a great question. Thanks for asking that, John. And my answer is that it very much depends on how often Google comes by to crawl your site. Mm-hmm. Right? If you're a large site with lots of page rank, and I wish I could give a specific number here, but when you see that at least 90% of all your pages are crawled once a day, I think that's already really, really good and a very high amount. When that's the case, you can feel free to make changes more often, than other sites where maybe only a small amount is regularly being crawled and the other pages are crawled once a week or something in those regards. So we very much use crawl rate as a guiding factor here.
Fantastic. Right, well, thank you, Kevin. I'm afraid an hour has flown by, everybody. We're out of time, so massive thank you to everybody that has attended. I always like to finish on time because I know it gets to 5 o'clock in the UK and obviously later in Europe and so on, and people start to make want to wrap up before the journey home sort of thing. So massive thank you to everybody for attending today. Massive thank you to you, Kevin, for taking the time and some really good answers on the Q&A. So big thank you to Mr. Kevin Indig. As I mentioned, obviously, no problem at all. As I mentioned, obviously, the webinar at the start, the webinar is recorded. We've recorded the last hour. So for everybody that's either signed up or attended today, we will be doing a full recap on the DeepCrawl blog of all of this. And we'll be posting out the recording of the session as well on the blog post. We'll also email it out to all of you guys that have signed up, because obviously we want to make sure that you get first refusal on it and get a hold of it and listen back to it. It's great to hear the feedback, and thank you. It's so positive to hear that people are going to take a lot of these applications back to the office and start to put them to use. Please, we do like your feedback. There is a survey at the end of this, so it'll take you about 10 seconds of your time. Please take the time to fill that in for us, and please do go in the chat box on the right-hand side and download our site architecture white paper. There's some fantastic content in there as well. Our next webinar is in February on the 27th with Mr. Dan Taylor, called The Edge of SEO, Getting Around Technical Barriers. So please start to sign up for that one as well. You will find that on our website. And that will be expanding on his talk from Tech SEO Boost as well, where he won the research award for it. So I'm very much looking forward to that one. So without further ado, obviously I'd like to just wrap up and say a massive thank you to Kevin again. Great presentation, fantastic attendance from everybody today. And just a second as well, we've got so many questions here. We will try and get back to everybody. So we'll go through the same process. We'll wrap all the questions up together. And the ones that I couldn't ask today, we'll see if we can get Kevin to, if it's okay by you, Kevin, to drop a quick answer on each one of those, and we'll maybe publish that as well as a separate Q&A blog post from this, because we've got a huge, fantastic amount of questions. So thank you very much to everybody for that. Okay, we're out of time. Thank you again. My name's John Myers. This has been Revolutionizing Internal Link Building on the latest DeepCrawl webinar. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the next one in February. Thank you, everybody.